Okay, hi everyone. Thanks a lot for coming along. So today's session is going to be with me, Michiel, and also Nick, who you can see there. So the plan is that I'll do a quick wee introduction, and then we're going to switch over to Nick, who's going to introduce you to some useful tools for measuring and understanding your carbon footprint from computation and helping you to schedule things so you can minimize that. And then at the end, and after that, we'll have a little hands-on demonstration where you can use some of the tools, depending how many of you actually have your laptops at the ready. If it's the zero, then we'll skip that part. Or maybe I'll show you in mine. And then finally, Nikhil is going to give a presentation on how we can kind of balance different demands on us from different contexts. Okay, so I mean, I think we're all aware of what the problem is. I just thought I would do one little slide in case anyone was unaware that we're in a bit of trouble, but we are. So we should probably do some stuff to be in less trouble or marginally less trouble. So as we all know, the Earth is warming in a quite frightening manner because of things that we have chosen to do over the past 100 years, but especially in the last decades. So we need to change what we're doing in order to try and reduce the ultimate consequences of previous decisions. So I'll just introduce who we are as well. So the three of us that are here today are from the Sustainability and Environmental Action SIG, which quite nicely goes down to CSIG. That's one of OHBM's special interest groups. We've been going for a few years now, and we focus on giving advice, coming up with some solutions, or trying to come up with some solutions for different aspects of the pollution and environmental effects that we as neuroimaging people have on the world. So some people within the group work on the annual meeting, coming up with ideas or suggesting ideas to OHBM of how they can reduce the environmental degradation caused by running a meeting like this. Other people work on the costs of our neuroimaging actual pipelines, data acquisition, data analysis, data storage. That's what we're going to talk about today. And then other people are involved in coming up with ways of trying to spread the message, like we are trying to do today. We've got a few events on. I'll do my wee bit of shameless advertising. So tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, at probably the least attended symposium of the entire conference will be our symposium on unpopular ideas at 9 a.m. So I'll see you all there. I look forward to it. We've also got a social going on at lunchtime on Wednesday, where we're going to try and find somewhere to have a picnic. So we'll see how that goes. I see a temple across the road. That should be fine. And we've got a table, a booth in the main poster hall where we're at 401, I think. So come by, chat with us. And if any of you want to join, we're always happy to have new people. Okay, so I'll turn you over to, oh, that's the wrong one. I'll turn you over to Nick now, who will introduce some tools that can help you with reducing the cost of your data analysis and so on.
Great. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yep.
So this is a screen. Could you start sharing your screen, maybe? The screen is being actively shared. Share something. Okay. Can you see these slides now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My name's Nick. I'm a research fellow from the School of Psychology at the University of Sussex here in the UK. I've been working for the last year and a half on how to measure and reduce the carbon footprint of computing for human neuroimaging specifically. And today I'll be talking about some insights we've had from our work. So for a bit of context, we don't often think about the carbon footprint of computing, but there is one. Because anytime that we use energy for computing, whether that's pressing go on running analyses or storing data on servers, we're emitting carbon. And estimates vary pretty wildly, but it's predicted that data centers and the IT sector as a whole accounts for somewhere between 1% and 4% of global CO2 emissions, which is pretty high when you consider that might outweigh the individual contributions of things like aviation and shipping as industries. And things like advances in hardware do mean that computing is becoming more efficient over time and cheaper. But we're worried about this idea of a rebound effect, where resources becoming more available mean we end up using more rather than less, and our overall impact grows. So the first piece of this puzzle is the footprint of data storage itself. And again, it's not particularly intuitive, but just storing data on servers has a carbon footprint. The more data we store, the more energy we need to operate those servers and to air condition them and provide other various overheads. And it's predicted that it's somewhere in the region of 10 kilograms of carbon being emitted for each terabyte of data we store each year. We also need energy to back up that data, which happens pretty regularly on institutional servers. Maybe more importantly, though, the faster we fill servers up with data, the more quickly we need to buy and manufacture and transport new servers in to supplement or replace them. And the embodied footprint from this is considerably larger than that of actual data storage, likely. So this intersects with various open science issues. We want to make sure our data is well indexed, both we're storing it locally and on cloud computing services, that we're sharing enough to replicate, but not more than that we need. Just making sure that we have kind of a clean and understandable data set stored, basically. I'll talk today a bit about fMRI prep. Many of you will know this. It's a fMRI pre-processing tool which combines tools from various different sources. We found that for us, fMRI prep generated for a single subject just over 5 gigabytes of data, just for a 1 6-minute run. But only 4% of those files had any use to us in subsequent analysis, and the rest we could basically safely delete. So we developed this script that's available on GitHub, fMRI prep cleanup, which automatically combs through fMRI prep output, identifies what we believe is those junk files, which are largely intermediate working directory files, and deletes them. So on the GitHub, it explains how the script works and kind of how you can flexibly adapt it. We've also got one now for SBM, which you can find on my GitHub as well. So do check that out. This is quite an easy way to reduce the footprint of your storage just by cleaning up data you don't need. But the footprint of data processing itself is maybe more important in our work than the footprint of data storage. So I'll talk a bit about that now. So the crux of this issue is the longer that we have servers running tasks for us, generally the more energy they use and therefore the more carbon they emit. And if we can tend towards shorter runtime, we can correspond to kind of lower energy costs. And one aspect of this is just the efficiency of our programming and our coding. Because if we've written scripts that have sort of loops within loops within loops that are going over multiple iterations, we might end up redundantly using energy that we don't need to use. So if we can avoid this kind of sloppy coding, we can achieve what we want to achieve without having this sort of unnecessary impact. And again, you might only save a couple seconds in a single iteration, but that can add up to a lot of time and therefore a lot of compute energy over many iterations. So this is worth considering. Fortunately, we can estimate the carbon emissions of our computing with this fairly simple formula. And that is estimating first the energy usage attributable to CPU and RAM, the two elements of the actual computing that we're performing, multiplying that by the power use effectiveness, which is effectively how efficient are the hardware we're using. So we have higher and worse PUE if we need more energy to air condition servers, for example, and lower if it's less. And then by carbon intensity is kind of the final piece of this puzzle. Carbon intensity is basically for each kilowatt hour of energy that we use, how many grams of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions are we emitting? And this is lower when we rely more on low carbon and renewable sources like wind and solar and nuclear, and higher when we're relying on sources like natural gas and coal. And luckily for us in the UK, we can access data on carbon intensity live, as well as forecasts for the next 48 hours. So here we have data from this public API. It's a figure from a recent paper of ours. On the y-axis here, we've got the mean carbon intensity of the UK in grams. And then on the x-axis, we've got, for example, a given 8 a.m. on a given Tuesday in 2018 or 2021 or whatever that might be. So we can find the average carbon intensity for each kind of half an hour time point, basically, for each day of the week. And we can see fairly predictable patterns here where carbon intensity tends to peak at the start and the end of the working day when overall usage is highest, and therefore the grid has to rely on these less desirable high carbon energy sources, and lowest in the middle of the day and overnight, and particularly at the weekend when energy use is lower and we can rely more on more desirable low carbon sources. So this means that we can schedule analyses or data pre-processing to run at times of low carbon intensity. We can schedule it for a Saturday morning rather than a Friday afternoon and use the same amount of energy, but potentially with 30 to 40% less carbon. So there is a good amount of scope here to reduce the footprint of our computing this way. Another nice takeaway here is we can see that as time goes on, as the lines get darker here, the UK is gradually dropping in carbon intensity as we adopt more and more renewable sources. And hopefully we'll see that trend continue in coming years. Carbon intensity not only varies by time, but also by location, because different countries and regions will use different proportions of high carbon, low carbon energy. So you've got countries on the left here, US states on the right, and we can see that the carbon intensity of South Africa at the top there is about 800 times higher than that of Iceland, with South Africa relying largely on coal and Iceland largely on geothermal energy. And it's the same for US states. When we compare someone like Wyoming to someone like Vermont, there's a good amount of difference here. This is obviously slightly harder to use than the time of computing because we're often tied to the physical location of servers. One way we can make use of this information is when we're storing data on cloud computing services that might be based, for instance, in the US or in Canada, with Canada having generally cleaner energy than the US. And I think we'll talk a bit later about the kind of social implications of that trade-off. So there are several different families of carbon trackers. We use that formula I showed before, but just in slightly different ways. So these are broadly online calculators where you can manually input parameters and it will spit out an estimate of carbon emissions at the end. Embedded packages where we code carbon tracking tools directly into software like fMRI Prep. And server-side tools where we make use of high-performance computing logs after a job has run, logs that are normally saved out by default anyway. And these have various upsides and downsides in terms of their flexibility and accessibility and ease of use and all these things. I won't go into those in too much detail now, but it's worth checking out this paper from 2023 if you are interested. From our own experience, these server-side tools tend to be the best balance in terms of providing easy access to information without you having to manually input parameters each time. So I do recommend checking out those tools in particular. So I'll talk now about some research that we've run recently here at Sussex, me and my PI, Dr. Charlotte Ray, on how to actually just reduce energy usage from our computing for neuroimaging. And our first study focused specifically on pre-processing of fMRI data in fMRI Prep. With Neil and Nikhil as well contributed to this work. So yeah, there's been a kind of a CSIG collaboration. So fMRI Prep, as I've said, is this fMRI pre-processing pipeline that combines a number of different packages from different sources or tools from different sources. It's viewed by many as being one of kind of the best practice for pre-processing at the moment, but it can be quite computationally expensive, which is why we're interested in it. And luckily for us, it provides this variable command line structure where we can add and remove and parametrically vary different pre-processing options and therefore look systematically at their effect on predicted CO2 emissions or estimated CO2 emissions. So we use data from OpenNeuro for 257 subjects who each completed just one run, so about 5 minutes of a stop signal task. So they're either pressing a button on cue or inhibiting a button response on cue. And this task was important for us because we needed one with fairly predictable and reliable patterns of activation in the brain. So we'd expect the primary motor cortex to light up during button pressing and areas like the pre-supplementary motor area to light up during response inhibition. And we use height of statistical activation in these regions of interest as our proxy for how good a job the pre-processing pipeline was doing, with the idea that it would expect to see activation in these regions and then kind of a more sensitive pipeline should do a better job at revealing those statistical effects. So we ran this same data through 8 different versions of fMRI Prep. This included a baseline pipeline with settings kept largely at default, one where we remove free surface reconstruction, which is normally there by default. a sloppy testing mode you can implement in fMRI prep, which basically cuts corners on registration intended for when you're kind of testing the feasibility of a pipeline. Low memory mode kind of restricts the memory that's given to pre-processing. In P4, we added a surface output space alongside our volumetric one. In ICA Aroma, we added the automatic removal of motion artifacts. Then we had the field map free distortion correction technique specific to fMRI prep. And finally, one where we increased the resolution of our volumetric output space from 2 millimeters to 1 millimeter. So we have in the green line here, we've got our estimated carbon emissions using our carbon tracker. And in purple and pink, our activation of regions of interest, taking as our measure of pre-processing performance. We've got baseline here in the middle of this dotted line and our experimental pipelines on the sides. So a few standout things. We can see first that removing surface reconstruction reduced emissions by about 48% with no drop in pre-processing performance as we measured it. Doing things like low memory mode reduced emissions by 6%, and the output was identical to baseline, so we lost nothing in performance there. On the other end of the spectrum, increasing the resolution of our output data increased emissions by 70% and file size by a massive 200% with no bump in performance. And basically what this shows is that the carbon emissions of our computing dissociates from the quality of the data that we get out. So we don't need to sacrifice one for the other. We can convert this to be slightly more concrete into miles driven in a gasoline-powered car. So across the whole sample, at baseline, this was equivalent to driving 19.2 miles. When we remove surface reconstruction, this drops down to 10 miles. And when we increase the resolution of our data, it jumps up to 32.6 miles. And obviously, the larger the data set you use, we only had a small amount of data for each person. But the more data you use and the higher the carbon intensity you have and all these things, your estimates of miles driven would jump up. But the kind of scale of difference should be relatively reliable here. We were able to make 6 recommendations based on these findings. So this included disabling surface reconstruction if you don't need those subsequent files. That can massively reduce emissions. If you're just testing the feasibility of a pipeline, consider using that sloppy flag to cut corners in registration. Low memory mode is worth using as well to cut your footprint without changing anything in the actual output. ICA Aroma gave a small bump in performance for a 2% rise in emissions, so not that big a rise, and it's worth it as a luxury option if you need it. That field map free distortion correction technique appeared to increase emissions and degrade data quality in our case. That's one to avoid for the moment. While it's using field maps for distortion correction will be the kind of the better choice. And refrain from using high resolution output spaces unless you necessarily need to, because this again can increase emissions without necessarily improving what we get out. So for the next study, we then compared this time not just within fMRI prep, but across packages, looking at FSL, SPM, and fMRI prep. This time doing pre-processing and statistical analysis, with fMRI prep data being analyzed in FSL and otherwise data being pre-processed and analyzed within the respective package. Again, we use the exact same data from that Open Neuro data set. So the one change is that because we wanted to keep everything at default in fMRI prep this time, we went from a 2 millimeter standard space to kind of native resolution, which is the pure default that fMRI prep gives in pre-processing. And when we can compare carbon emissions across these, we see some really substantial differences. So there is a difference between SPM and FSL, with SPM emitting about 30% more carbon across pre-processing and statistical analysis. But the difference for fMRI prep was huge, about 30 times higher than FSL and 23 times higher than SPM. There's a difference between kind of 4 hours of pre-processing versus 10 minutes. When we look at statistical sensitivity, again, as our measure of performance, we looked at 4 regions this time, and we can see that fMRI prep, although it varies by region, fMRI prep generally outperforms FSL and SPM by 10 or 20%, with FSL in turn outperforming SPM. So we can see that fMRI prep basically provides substantially high relative emissions with a small bump in performance as well. I want to make clear that we're not demonizing use of high compute tools here like fMRI prep, because having slightly better data, having robust and data is important for worthwhile science, for good open science. So we're not saying people shouldn't use these tools, but just saying that if you are, maybe consider the ways in which you are using them, whether that's removing pre-processing steps you don't need or scheduling times to run at low carbon intensity, as we'll see in a sec. These are kind of ways that you can hopefully reduce the footprint of your computing without losing anything in the quality of your data and the scientific work. And I think that is me finished. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to Neil, I think. So thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks, Nick. So I'm just going to introduce you to a couple of tools. You can put, one of them is just a website, the other one is a small package from GitHub. Does anyone want to download a small package and run a command line? Oh, we've got some takers. Okay. I'll give you a moment then. Okay. So the first one is this tool called the Climate Aware Task Scheduler, or CATS. So you can get that from this URL. So I guess if you Google green scheduler, you'll be able to find it. I'll give you one moment. I'll find it. Yep. Okay. Okay, so this is a simple Python tool. Unfortunately, I believe still limited to UK locations at the moment. But as I understand it, and Nick confirmed this, the developers are keen to expand it out into other locations. It just depends on places having data that's available through an API. So apparently the UK has this, one of apparently the few things that the UK is not awful at the moment. So that means that they were able to use it easily. But if you guys know of other places that have this kind of information available through an API, then the developers, I'm sure, would be happy to get a pull request to add that into the tool and make it a bit more widely useful. So all it does is work out or estimate for you how much carbon it's going to cost for you to run a computational process of a specific duration within a specific location. You're going to need Python 3.8 and greater for it to work, as I discovered earlier today when it didn't work. So all you do is put in, run this code, the cats. You put in the duration of your process, your estimated duration of your process, and the postcode of your location. You can also add in some more information through config files where you can define like what type of processor you've got, what kind of RAM you're working with, and so on and so forth to make it a bit more accurate. So go ahead and run it if you can. For those who are just watching, will it work? There we go. So if we run it, it outputs the amount of carbon emitted if you just run it just now, and then it'll also tell you how much would be emitted if you ran your processing at a more optimal time. So integrating that with the other tools that can tell you what times are optimal, it allows you to plan and schedule things. We can then see how things change if you change your location. So if we change to Edinburgh instead of the other place, we can see that we would save a considerable amount of carbon by being in Edinburgh instead of, I'm guessing, Sussex, since it's Nick that prepared this. No, not at the moment. But if you know of an API to get the stuff from the US, then yeah, I'm sure it can be added fairly. I'm not a developer. I'm just saying this. So,
easy cluster, like, how do we start a conversation? Like, what do we say? Like, hey, here's this tool, like, it needs API. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. So I think, Nikhil, do you want to? I don't use clusters. I don't know.
So there is, it's not an exact same tool, but there are, it's called PUE, the power usage efficiency, I believe. So those numbers are available even in the US and Canada. They're slightly different, I believe, but Nick can correct me. The way I would start this conversation is like asking them, we want to build a scheduler like Slurm or SGE, whatever you use, with a green mode. And that way it basically calculates the optimal, because I believe it already has the ways to the delay, or it could be a cron job, whatever, but it can be easy to implement. Yeah.
There's submitting a job to a club here, usually has a sit and so, yeah, I'm curious how that works with relation to this, because if the optimal time to get you that wait the recommendation that absolutes until the next day, or yeah, how does that work relative to what the job starts?
Yeah, that would make sense, depending, like, how time critical your stuff is, but realistically, how time critical is any of our stuff,
Jobs are around. I think generally the idea is to make the cluster run all the time. Seems to me like the variance that you cited a lot, let's call it changing. There's like a way that
yeah.
Thing that needs to be the energy is.
Yeah, I mean, the difference here is because Scotland runs mostly off renewable energy and England doesn't. Yeah, so if you're in Scotland and Quebec, we're good. But I think, I mean, what I do know is from like if you're doing it through like cloud servers like Google or Amazon and stuff, like there you can select your location of where you want things to be run.
The screen is dimming.
Oh. There we go. There you can select the location, and you can select based on that kind of planning. Like, do we put it in Quebec or do we put it in Texas, kind of thing. And also choosing which cloud server to use also is an influence, because they're not all equal. I mean, the information I know in this is maybe a couple of years out of date, so they might have improved, but from memory, Google was actually one of the best in terms of like using renewables, or claiming to anyway. Amazon were not good. Baidu were awful. So don't use Baidu. And the other ones are so looking into stuff and planning that stuff, I think is realistic. Yeah. There's another question there.
More general question, I guess. It's some people to do that to if I send someone one more person still from Montreal, and then we acquire a player that doesn't represent it. And we have some kind of scale, but we're setting that's important.
Well, I guess you've heard this.
There is a website, right? I think it's called greenalgorithms.com or something like that site. So you can calculate how many transatlantic flights it takes for certain things. Code Carbon from Mila also does that. It's not exactly easy to use that for some of the pipeline calculations, but there are estimates that you can make.
That said, it's good. I think emphasize where these
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's a question that we get asked quite a lot of, like, does any of this really matter? But I would say yes. Like, yeah, individual changes are not going to solve this at all, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do them as part of the solution. We've suggestions have been made about the flight thing. No one's going to change it at present, so do what we can. Yeah.
I appreciate the voter efficiency recommendation, and I just wanted to tack onto it and talk about like code testing a little bit too, because I think that it's super common that there's a lot of sort of like trained programmers that are taught to test scalable, to debug on really like small scale things, to like make sure your pipeline like test pipeline feasibility and all the way through on toy data or whatever, right? On really, really small stuff. And I think that like a huge on the coding side, a huge resource waste is really large jobs that die 95% of the way through. And I think that that's a kind of scientific culture thing that maybe we haven't super caught up to, that I think we're making a pretty big actually in terms of like counter efficiency.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think there's something to be written there actually, like for like Aperture Neuro or something, like just a little bit, because we always say like code efficiently, but yeah, I've never been taught how to code. So it's like getting together some tips and stuff might be a good idea. Yeah, good. After some students of mine did looked into coding efficiency, or not efficiency, but quality in another context, and they can get, in like sensory stimulus code. It's terrible. was the outcome of that paper. So I think that's something that we could really work on as a community. Yeah, it's a good point.
Can you still hear me, Neil?
Sorry?
Can you still hear me? Hello.
Yep.
I just shared in the chat. I don't know how you share this with other people. We ran a workshop last year in London on the environmental impacts of computing, which included a presentation on the benefits of efficient programming. And that's there. There's a recording of that on YouTube if people are interested in checking it out, because one of our colleagues there went into quite a lot of detail on how to avoid kind of pitfalls of efficient and sloppy coding. So that could be worth checking out if people are interested in that.
Hope people can see. So that would be a EIC workshop. So if you want to look it up. We've got one tiny wee bit left of the other thing. So, okay, that was that tool. It generated conversation. That was good. The other one is, like, again, UK-based one, because the information is available. And I think this is from the National Grid. So it's carbonintensity.org.uk. And that just tells you, like, a day-to-day forecast of when the carbon cost is going to be higher and lower. So again, if you're just planning stuff, like, okay, I need to run this analysis, will I do it today, will I do it on Friday? This could give you some information that you wait on Friday and you can save 20% or something, presumably when it's more windy or something. Okay, so some little tools there. Hopefully you'll be able to use them, and do look into the fMRI prep stuff that Nick was talking about. We've got some preprints up on that it'd be good if you could take a look at. So I'll turn over to Nikhil now.
Yeah. This is going to be very short. It's mostly was slides to open up conversation about how do we align open science and sustainable science practices. Open science has been in this, this is a very nice community, been around for a while, that has not only brought good practices, but also cultural change. And that's something we would like to learn from and also collaborate together. So, cool. So basically, I'll just show you a couple of things, continuing what Nick has shown about the cost of computing, how they can be common goals between open and sustainable science, and of course the trade-offs that Nick and JB actually talked about in previous conversation. Cool. So the way I like to think about this is, I mean, as any environmental or sustainable issue, there is individual responsibility, and then there is institutional as well, or infrastructure level things that need to happen. And what Nick has done wonderfully is to show, as an individual scientist, what type of things we have control over, what type of things we can measure ourselves or change ourselves. So fMRI prep or any machine learning model development types of analysis we do, it kind of boils down to individual choices and responsibility. But at the end of the day, as Seb was mentioning before, if HPCs are going to keep growing and keep using non-renewable energy, then there is not much impact we could have. But so they both need to go hand in hand. That's kind of a larger point. So how does open science help here? It's basically, if you're familiar with FAIR, which stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable Open Science Principles, they fit right into sustainability. If by data sharing, you obviously use less computing. So we've been promoting this idea of more and more people should share their process data and not just the raw data. That way people can save the entire, the heavy computing burden on the pre-processing pipelines. And that would save a lot of compute power and time as well. So currently it's actually pretty difficult to do. It's not that easy. So what's needed to make this happen with open science practices would be improve your data discovery. So findability of your data. If that's better, then people can know this thing is already been processed and can use it directly. And as a shameless plug, I'm going to talk about Sebastian's work here from our lab, who has been working on a project called NeuroBagel that helps you with data discovery. On a similar point, model sharing, especially in machine learning, which takes huge amount of training cycles, also takes a lot of compute. So if you have a good way of annotating your model, that can be found and shared as a pre-trained models for your other analysis, that would be great as well. And so people must have seen Hugging Face type of things, where they have created a nice repository for your models, or model zoos as they're called. Maybe hopefully we can do the same thing for neuroimaging, which usually has orders of magnitude larger data sets. Then the last part is, again, this mostly what open science has been promoting for decades now. It's the standards and harmonization. What essentially boils down to, we make fewer mistakes, so we have to do fewer repetitions or iterations of our analysis. So standardization, again, is a good practice that saves a lot of compute, data storage, all the things Nick talked about before. But again, for that, we need to spend more time documenting our data and our practices better. So better harmonization between how we name and share our data would really help with the sustainability of our research practices. So that was more of a technical issues. I also see a lot of cultural overlap in between open science. I mean, they have hosted us for this session. So yeah, so we would love to know how do you guys bring about change? How do you go from non-open to open? Similarly, how do we go from being less sustainable to more sustainable, not at just at individual level, but get institutions to agree to use renewable energy sources, for example. So those type of things. Traveling is a big cost. As we've said before, I mean, Open Science has been doing wonderful hackathons, brain hacks, global brain hacks, which are essentially hybrid. So those type of things. We have also talked about everything has a, many of these things could use motivation or incentives. So awards could be nice as well. So something that we could work on together. How do we incentivize sustainable practices at the individual level, or create champions who would drive this cause further? Last thing I do want to mention, because I'm here, even though I know flying is bad. So this boils down to partly some trade-offs that we have to face off with. So it would be wonderful for example, if, as Nick and from the audience we talked about having I'll prefer countries that basically have much greener resources and do processing there, or move our research essentially to the green mode or green areas of the world. But that essentially creates a trade-off between the EDI principles or inclusivity principles in particular. So we don't want to create an environment where now the research becomes kind of a monopoly of certain regions for these reasons. And there is no easy solution to this. So it's basically how do we harmonize these two maps where we, on one side, we have incentives for being more sustainable, but at the same time, we also want to balance the areas which may not be sustainable right now, but do need more access to data as well as research. So that's kind of the topics of discussion. If we have time, I wanted to touch upon. Nick has already, Neil has already shown this before, but just a reminder, we also have a booth. So if you're interested in C6 activities, please come say hi. At 4:01, we have a symposium tomorrow, and as well a picnic with free lunch on Wednesday. And we will meet again at the booth if you're interested for the lunch. So for the sake of time, I'll stop here. Happy to note your thoughts on the,
Yeah. Just from experience, you actually see how much, when you start ranking institutions or you start ranking organizations for how much they contribute to the community or how much they're pushing on green agendas, it suddenly leads to a lot of change. Like we had this in Manchester that, they were ranked second in Europe for a local impact or something like that, which also, incorporated getting energy from big solar panel fields now. And as soon as they're doing well in something, they start really like focusing a lot of energy on it, and well, in the kind of loose sense. But yeah, I wonder if there's ways to actually compare and contrast against organizations or against other institutions and so on to achieve some of those goals.
Yeah, to that. So I've spent years trying to get my institution to do anything environmentally friendly. And then suddenly the university rankings started to include this. And now I'm inundated with emails about, oh, you should be doing this and this and this and this. Yeah, I know. So things do change, yeah, when they're forced to change. Yeah. But I think that's, so being pessimistic, which join the club. But I think that we try and tell people about these things because, as Neil says, like once people start doing stuff, you can generate those political contexts where the people who don't want to do it suddenly have to do it, kind of thing, or they're incentivized to do it for the sake of mammon rather than the sake of the opposite of that.
I'll say as well, in the UK and I think beyond, for wet lab context, we have the LEAF, the Laboratory Efficiency Assessment Framework, which basically gamifies sustainability and gives awards like bronze, silver, and gold based on how sustainable the practices are. And I think they're working on like a dry lab version as well at the moment, which would include things like computing and stuff like this. And I think, yeah, giving people an award to hold on to, even like at a lab level, rather even beyond kind of like whole institutions, is a helpful thing as well. That makes things more visible, I think.
I have a question. It's a lazy question, but it's, the enthusiasm of the group isn't that big, because I'm assuming there are more people like. When computers asking what's the big impact on detail, was trying to figure out the institutional responsibility. I'm honestly not sure exactly. So, for example, we will try to another place to help people avoid reprocessing data. If we found out how many people have a copy of weekly biobank and then run the same analysis again. What's the big screw, so to say? What is the thing that has, like, how many groups of 4 people can you fly across the world to avoid one more ecobiotic? Is that a reasonable question that you have?
I think, yeah. So maybe my talk tomorrow is a little bit getting at that to some extent. Like Nikhil, or I think we see this from a kind of global. I work in Taiwan. I've been exposed to slightly different contexts, and become aware that we're talking about this whilst the people who are actually represented in the neuroimaging is a minuscule percentage of the global population. So obviously we want to get these people involved, but flying people to everywhere is going to be counterproductive. So how to actually affect that?
One thing I was
pause for thought, but
no, the big screw or the switch, whatever. I think one thing could be more transparency in how much if institutes or labs or even individuals or papers, like Nick had this idea as well, that we should report the carbon emissions of the analysis that we have done in the paper. Similarly, if institutes have to report those things, that transparency probably could help more. Yeah.
To me, we get rid of the flying 4 people to do one thing, but that I think happens because the community priorities are not to improve the things that those 4 people want to improve. Like, if you have the overall community operating with slightly different objectives, that you start to be able to build systems that are more open and transparent and that are more directly accessible by people, without having to send people over to press the buttons for them, kind of thing. So to me, that's the big screw. Just change everything; it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's a spoiler for your presentation too.
It's 9 o'clock tomorrow. Talking about pessimism. Yeah. If you've no more questions, we can wrap it up. Thanks for all those questions. Those were really good, and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Just imagining, I know in Open Euro there's a button we say analyze with, and then there's like 6 different things. I think it's if each of these buttons had a little color icon next to it of how much is it going to cost as screen button. I'm sure everybody clicks the green button, but the people who aren't the green button are going to have a strong opinion about this.
That's the problem with the system.
That's true. It just acts as an incentive or more of a barrier.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. We've been, I mean, it's Michael done a lot of this, not me, but like fMRI Prep, the guys, the people there were quite happy to talk to us, and like I think they made the version that's like
Yeah, guys.
Might as well.
No, they're aware, right? So Chris helped me do the PR for the Core Carbon thing. And like I said, unfortunately, Core Carbon has some issues, which makes it tricky to do those and measure things on server side. That's when Nick came up with an alternative, which requires, it makes it easier to measure things on the HPC side as well. So.